My guest today is Sam Cooper, investigative journalist and publisher of The Bureau. We discussed the NSICOP report on foreign influence in Canada, what we've come to learn, who may be involved, and what should be done as a consequence. Once again, Sam drops nuclear truth bombs and highlights elements of a national conspiracy that many of us are still coming to terms with. Stay tuned. Sam Cooper, once again. Here we go again, fixing the hair. I love it. Fresh cut, fresh shave, looking conference ready, my friend. How are you doing?
I'm great. Yeah, I'm on the way to a conference, over in McGill, Montreal, right in the center of the action. So I had to get all shaved and cut up for that.
So, order of the day today, we're going to talk about the NSICOP, as you call it, or the NSLMNOP report. I want to start by saying this, and I didn't say it before we started recording, but I wrote about this on X a few days ago, and I want to say it to you. Of all the things, as horrifying as all of this is, as terrible and potentially nation-shattering as it is, I am so happy to see you vindicated. I've talked to some pretty controversial people on this podcast. I've had Robert Malone, I've had Harvey Risch, Naomi Wolf, Brett Weinstein, a lot of people who garner a lot of anger from people on certain sides of the political aisle. Of all the people I've spoken to, I have never had as much of a vitriolic response as I did to you in the early days. Really? Just an onslaught of emails and DMs from accounts that I have never heard of before, people I had never spoken to, calling you a racist, saying you're a conservative shill, saying you're a hitman for the right. Yeah.
You know what? That totally makes sense. And as you know, I'll let you continue, but I don't want it to slip my mind. That's consistent with my story of what happened to me at Global News in 2020. I felt that I was targeted very, rapidly and forcefully with a Chinese intelligence sort of media operation. And I have little doubt, that you're catching some of that. I won't go on and on, but everyone, all the good podcasters that have me on, sometimes they flip back some interesting messages they get, and I go, yeah, that's the MSS. Yeah, that's the United Front. What's up? That's why I say, I'm not strapped, but I know people that are. And
well, I never flipped any of those back to you because I knew, whenever you get messages like that, you're hovering right over the target, right? And you're dropping some bombs. And the interesting thing is that the more often you and I do this together, and the more that comes to light in, mainstream, I wouldn't say media, but just mainstream culture, the less those messages arrive. And it's because, well, you can't call Sam Cooper a conservative shill anymore. And just for the record, I have said this so many times on X to people, but you are nonpartisan, as am I. I think you and I both would consider ourselves firmly in the middle. And I get
everyone from right to left in
right
Canada as my, case by case evidence guided. Yeah.
Right. And, it's like the messages that I get every week where people are calling me a Fed. And I'm like, if I was a Fed doing regular episodes with Sam Cooper, who is piece by piece taking apart a lot of what's going on around us, then I would be doing a really horrible job at being a Fed. Right.
Yeah.
But, I just want to say, man, I've been a fan of yours for years. And, when I started this podcast, like, you were on a very short list of people. And, I want to say this publicly. Like, when I first reached out to you, you were a bit hesitant to talk to me. And I know it's because your integrity is of the utmost importance to you, right? Your integrity is top priority, right?
Everyone. I mean, I assess people and I'm careful, when I talk. Yeah. And, when I recognized your evidence guided, and everyone has their opinions, and everyone can, read what they read and make their assessments. And, when I understood that you're reading and you're careful, I said, there's probably areas that I won't go until I investigate it myself. And that's true, because there's people out there. I'm not going to go out. The stuff I'm reporting on is wild enough, right? It took
Yeah.
me a long time to prove it to myself and believe it and write it. That, there's all kinds of things I could believe are happening in the world, but I'm just not going to go there until I know it's provable, within my own way that I chase stuff. So
Well,
that's that.
that's it. And I, like with me, I've gone down some rabbit holes on this podcast with some people, right? And one of the first things you said to me was like, "Hey, I can't talk about XYZ, right? Like I have to stay within what I know." And that was when I told you, I said, "Sam, I'm not going to take you down any wormholes here. Like we're going to stick to what you specialize in, right?" And I want people to know that, like, you're not a guy who just jumps out there and spews conspiracy theories for the sake of clicks or subscribers on your Substack. Like, you are a guy who is extremely thorough. And yeah, I just wanted to say to you, man, I'm so happy to watch. Like, I mean, as devastating as the news is, I wish you were completely wrong. You know what I mean? Like, in a perfect world, Sam Cooper would be, a conspiracy theorist, tinfoil hat, nut job, conservative shill. But in the situation that we're in, I am just happy to see you vindicated, because you've walked through the fire, my friend. And, people don't know like what it goes on around you when, you're not publishing, stories on the Bureau or talking to me on this podcast. And you've been through a lot, man. And now here you are on the other side and at the very, very top of the mountain. So I just wanted to say that to you, man. I'm when this NSICOP report came out, you were the first person I thought about, because I was like, Sam's been saying this for like years, right? And now it's finally coming to light, and now everybody is realizing Sam Cooper. We should make a Sam Cooper was right T-shirt. I might actually do that, and we'll split the proceeds.
Okay, yeah, then I can give it to some of my loved ones, and don't have to tell them that. But yeah, with NSICOP, I know, just ask away, but I mean, it's getting there. There's one mountain left to climb, and I'll tell you this, in a really brief way, when we have reports in Canada coming out and saying it's not just people being corrupted by foreign hostile states, it's people being corrupted by people that are human trafficking in Canadian cities, people involved in the laundering of fentanyl cash and stuff like that. Then I'll know that Canadians, that is, the people in Parliament and the people that are now tasked with investigating them, are being fully upfront with Canadians, because that I've always felt, when I knew that it could be proved to my satisfaction, those were the facts. That's when I realized this is a story I can't give up on, because it's literally, it's almost too shocking to believe. But if you ignore it, it's literally, we're talking about the sovereignty of our country.
That's right. In my opinion, I think this story is the biggest story in the history of our country, because of what it means if we don't disentangle it, right, and address it, right?
True. People find it hard to believe that places like Mexico or Cambodia got that way for a reason, and that's because they started to go down the road to being controlled by narcos and organized crime, and they never had a civil society or people within government that were ready to stand up, say, here's the facts, let's get some laws and institutions in place to take a U-bend on this road, because we're going the wrong way.
Yeah.
And people find it hard to believe Canada's at kind of a, I don't know, it's on that road, right? But that's the fact.
Yeah, and just to kind of elaborate on what you were saying, like, a lot of people, when we look back in history at like Nazi Germany is always a great example of this, because it took Hitler 15 years to become chancellor, right? Like, people think you wake up one morning and all of a sudden, Nazi tanks are rolling down your street and Jews are getting thrown into concentration camps, but it doesn't happen like that. It's a slow decline, right? And we are on the road, perhaps not to, a Holocaust, but we are on the road to something very, very dark. And we're, I would say, crossing the halfway point, right?
It's a much different form of political capture. But when you have, a party who, an expert in the United States now, openly, someone that I can talk to that's conversant with, the Pentagon,
Yeah.
it's easy to argue the CCP is the biggest illicit organization in the world. And so if this is the organization that's working very hard to capture Canada, yeah, people may say, why did you just bring up Nazi Germany? But look at what's happening in Xinjiang, and look at the darkness of that regime and what they're trying to do in other countries. It's a
Mhm.
different form of elite capture and political capture, and it's a slow boil. That's, you're right about that. Dark political movements get rolling and normalized, right? And that's what you're talking about.
Yeah, I mean, this is, uh, Hitler capturing the Sudetenland and moving into Czechoslovakia, right? Like that's what this is essentially. So let's move forward into this NSICOP report. Let's talk about it from the top. What is this report the result of? Who wrote it, and why does it exist?
Um, it exists because, as we've talked about at Global News, due to the work on my book, I started to talk to people that reached out to me from inside government, making the connection between how I discovered the Chinese organized crime and United Front in Vancouver and how that was getting into politics. Then government people read my book, government people in capitals around the world, but ones in Canada brought me further information. People know the story. Some people may think the Globe and Mail did a lot of the heavy lifting, but no, it was Global News that did most of the stories that were examined in the Hogue Commission, which resulted from Global News's reporting and some excellent reporting at the Globe and Mail. A lot of, as we've talked about, Justice Hogue said, yes, there was interference, but maybe it wasn't quite as bad as some people think. And yet it was very, very, very much worse and proven compared to what David Johnston, Justin Trudeau's friend, said. So NSICOP is this body that's tasked, it's bipartisan parliamentarians to look into intelligence. So when all this blew up with Global News reporting and Globe and Mail, this body, another review body, was tasked to look at the allegations started by Global News, reported by Global News. And so they came out with this 92-page report last week that ratchets up the findings again compared to the Hogue Commission and says not only, is there interference, but there are witting and semi-witting parliamentarians sitting in both houses, so the House of Commons and the unelected senators, that are knowingly working for hostile states, most importantly China and India, in a reciprocal quid pro quo relationship. So it all relates to the stories that Global News broke, that in the Toronto area, CSIS discovered allegedly that Beijing's United Front, this loosely coordinated network of so many community groups under the thumb of Beijing, surround politicians, basically try to get the ones that are pro Beijing elected, and as we found out, attack other ones. And so this is what I reported at Global News. Some were witting, some were unwitting. There was a group of 11 in Toronto in 2019 that CSIS said are attached to this United Front influence group. And so what we reported was that, Beijing, by offering this clandestine funding and support, which includes media, which includes, campaign volunteers, they seek to establish bonds that will be reciprocated when their political friends are elected and sitting in parliament. So you didn't have to, wait for the bombshell of this NSICOP report to see everything that was reported, but this report has come out and confirmed and added new details to what I reported, and that is that not only are some politicians, semi-witting or witting of receiving this report, but they're actively working for foreign states while sitting in parliament. That is what freshly blew Canadians' minds. And so it puts us in the bind, as you know. We these are unidentified politicians. And as I reported way back in November 2022, Canada lacks the laws to do anything about it. So we're sitting in a crisis of Canada's democracy where Canadians can know we've got some people sitting in parliament working allegedly for other states, but there's nothing we can do about it. And so that's pretty much, I think, where we are with this NSICOP report. One thing very important that it said is whether they picked up on my reporting or not, they said some parliamentarians are wittingly or through willful blindness accepting transfers of funds or benefits from foreign diplomats that have been concealed or layered, right? And so that is just prototypical standard money laundering language. And that was, I would say another bombshell line that calls back and supports what I reported at Global News, that in 2019, there was a clandestine transfer, through a community leader in various hands into an election interference network of $250,000. So you can see how it's lining up, and NSICOP is saying it's right and it's worse.
What really grabs me in all this is how cheap our politicians are. $250,000 is pennies. It like how cheap our democracy and our nation's security really is, right?
Yeah, well, I mean, this may be a good time to say that again, we've talked about before about how the Hogue Commission has only looked at, basically what the news that I broke, the key cases, some key figures. But remember, this is 2019, and this is what I would call one very solidly proven piece of intelligence that was so proven and so solid that figure, the sort of like the information around it makes it way up through various intelligence reports. And so I think, I'm not sure if I've told you or other podcasters that's one case, and there's other cases, there's other methods, Vancouver, Toronto, Montreal, Calgary, I believe other places. So that's a case in Toronto.
Yeah, and it's just a very small chip of a very large iceberg. It's an ice cube compared to an iceberg, I guess, right? Now, there's two questions I want to ask here. So I'll ask the first one, and then we'll get to the next one. These 11 current sitting members of parliament, if anybody's been paying attention to mainstream media, which I don't know if anybody is anymore, but, clips have circulated of journalists or reporters pressuring Justin Trudeau and Chrystia Freeland to release the identities of these people. And from everything that I've seen, they kind of dance around the question. Chrystia Freeland won't even answer it. She won't even directly address it. Aside from the obvious answer here, why are the Liberals protecting the identities of these people?
Well, you mentioned Chrystia Freeland. I mean, I've heard information from diaspora sources. I've got my notepad out to be accurate here, put together with a senior intelligence source that the last time we talked was about the illegal casino story and how that I connected to fundraising of Justin Trudeau and key senior Liberal Party members. And so, look, factually, Chrystia Freeland has someone working on her campaign in Toronto, as I know through photographs and sources, that is identified by my senior intelligence source as a very key political tool of the Toronto consulate. He's also a person that is connected to this illegal casino network and United Front groups that we talked about last time, connected to Cash for Access fundraisers for Justin Trudeau, which I've said before involve gangsters, connected to a FinTrack suspicious transaction report. So I don't want to get into the weeds, but I've given you enough there. This person worked for Chrystia Freeland. So she herself, I don't know that she's in that report. It would not surprise me if Chrystia Freeland has been briefed that you've got some problems around you. I don't think she's the worst one in the party by far. She's probably, she's taken some steps. Um, but that's your answer. In a nutshell, I was told senior Liberal Party of Canada members are exposed to Chinese intelligence fundraisers and they know it. They've been told about it. They've done little or nothing. So I would say that's reason number one. And I think I've, put enough facts out to, as we talked about in the last story. Okay, you've got Bill Blair sitting beside a number of people that I would say could be described as involved in, transfer paths involving concealed or layer funds from the Toronto consulate. And so why would Bill Blair not want to talk about that? Why would Chrystia Freeland not want to talk about those people sitting beside Bill Blair? Why would Justin Trudeau not want to talk about a person sitting directly to his right at a fundraiser who CSIS says is a senior financial operative for financial intelligence in the United Front? Just that's the answer. I could keep going on, but there's a lot of examples of that kind of activity.
Yeah, and that's that's the answer I was looking for, because look, I was on another podcast talking about this, but I'll say it here. We have 11 sitting members of parliament who are voting on legislation that have received.
Can I jump in there? So that
yes.
the 11 figure goes back to 2019.
Okay.
I believe we've confirmed 7 Liberals, 4 Conservatives at that time. It's possible some weren't reelected, but I was told that up to 50 people would be, targeted for support by these Beijing networks in 2021, right? So that's across Canada. So it could be 10 or 11 people. It could be, 25 people that are they semi-witting? Are they witting? Are they useful idiot dupes that just, welcome busloads of international students, or a donation from someone that they know is an organized crime figure in their community? I don't know, but it could be up to 50, including, witting, semi-witting, or dupes supported by China in our most recent federal election. And that's at the federal level, right? So back to your question, but I just wanted to parcel that off.
Sure. Yeah. Okay. So thank you for correcting that. So we don't know how many of these people, or who these people are, and how many of them are currently sitting members of our government. It could be anywhere from 5 to 50. Well, we don't know. It could be even more than that. Yeah. Right. And so what I'm saying is that these people are voting on legislation. These people are voting on policy that will affect you and me and every other person in this country. And as we've come to understand over the last 4 or so years, that this legislation that they're passing definitely has an impact, right? We have carbon taxes. We went through lockdowns and vaccine mandates, and whatever your feeling on them is, we went through all of that as a result of votes in our government. So what we have here is people who are under the influence of foreign regimes, right? Allegedly, who are voting on policy, who are voting on laws and voting on legislation that will affect us, like for the foreseeable future, and could potentially seriously damage our country. Right now, the next question I wanted to ask is, why don't we have processes in place to handle a scenario like this? Because, as you said, we are currently sitting in a crisis, and we're not able to manage it because we don't have the framework to do so. So why doesn't that exist?
So going back to NSICOP, I've reported at length at the Bureau how I obtained their 2019 draft review for Justin Trudeau on the problem of foreign interference that was growing. I would say, fair to say, the words I read was basically this is just snowballing. And Justin Trudeau, you don't have a foreign agent registry, which is what Australia has. Australia had to overcome willful blindness among, its some politicians, academics, and its elite to put in a foreign agent registry and other measures, including ones that would deal with treason and things of this nature, because Australia, was their sovereignty was threatened. They were undergoing the same thing from China, the same, incursion that Canada's suffering now. And Trudeau was told, you need to look at the CSIS Act, the RCMP Act, without getting into the legal weeds. The report said, as I've reported, Canada is fairly powerless, pretty much powerless to the RCMP. I don't believe has even laid one charge of, dealing with foreign interference, right? And they told Trudeau, take these steps or else. He did nothing. And that is not, that's not my assertion. Their NSICOP 2024 report came out and said, Justin Trudeau hasn't taken any action, and this is a serious failure that will harm Canada, could harm Canada for years to come. So point blank, the laws were recommended and the Trudeau administration did nothing. Why did they do nothing? What I am asserting is I think it's reasonable to look into the case that people in the Prime Minister's office, perhaps even Trudeau himself, could be, wittingly or unwittingly, if we're talking about Mr. Trudeau, falling under the influence of Beijing. So I think there's your answer.
Yeah, and I think just to add to that, I think it's interesting how India has been named as a country that has sought influence in our country, and Justin Trudeau hasn't really had much of a problem being critical of India in the press, right? Which is a shot across the bow from a world leader. However, he has been very, very, very careful as it relates to China. And that's the thing that perplexes me, right? I mean, if he's innocent in all this, if he's just a innocent bystander, just a doofus standing on a street corner as the bullets whirl past him, right? Then why would you be so openly critical of arguably the largest emerging economy in the world, and yet so quiet on China?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's probably two answers. The one was he was trying to prove, I think a number of, very credible people saw it, that he was trying to prove that he's tough on foreign interference, right? Because he was being questioned with regards to China. So he stands up and says, India did this, in a very sort of blatant, and it was pretty, not a very good way to take action on that case. We'll see how it turns out. But yeah, my answer on China is, as I've continued to look at, what could be involved in NSICOP, I just did a story this week that shows that, Aaron O'Toole, the former Conservative leader, testified to the Hague Commission. He believes Justin Trudeau laid the way for Chinese disinformation that attacked O'Toole and MP Kenny Chiu out in British Columbia, Richmond, as anti-Asian racists, and that disinformation was used to take out Kenny Chiu. Justice Hogue said, of any riding in 2019 or 2021, that's the one that she was confident saying, it looks like someone could have lost their seat because of Chinese disinformation. There's still another phase in the Hague Commission. She said they need to look into disinformation and how some candidates are supported clandestinely, how some are attacked. So maybe she'll have the confidence to say, yes, Kenny Chiu lost and his opponent, Parm Baines, won, and this is what I reported on. She's not there yet, but I am. Kenny Chiu was attacked with disinformation, which Aaron O'Toole said what Justin Trudeau paved the way for, because earlier in 2021, remember, the Conservatives were standing up in Parliament hammering for answers. What happened in the Winnipeg lab? Who are these, what are these allegations of the People's Liberation Army, running amok in our Winnipeg Pathogen 4 lab? Justin Trudeau and others stand up and say, well, this is fanning the flames of anti-Asian racism. So we've talked about this before. Trudeau is making irresponsible comments, which I have said, before I knew what I do now. It looks like he's amplifying Chinese intelligence narratives, and I think he was, and I think he knowingly is. So you ask, why is Justin Trudeau not, speaking out strongly against China? There's a lot of reasons, but the live one to question is, was Mr. Trudeau warned that Chinese disinformation was attacking Conservative MP Kenny Chiu? Meanwhile, these disinformation networks are supporting the Liberal candidate Parm Bains. And, did Trudeau and his senior staff do anything about it? I just reported this week. I think the evidence, even though redacted from the Hogue Commission, indicates no. They were warned on September 12th, 2021. We've got big concerns. This is CSIS about attacks on Kenny Chiu and Aaron O'Toole. I believe they would have been told these same networks are supporting your candidate, Parm Bains. We're going to leave it up to your judgment whether you intervene or not. And I'm saying the evidence suggests they did not intervene. And what's more, remember, after my reports start revealing election interference allegations, Justin Trudeau steps out again in it should be February 2023 and says, these allegations are raising concerns of anti-Asian racism. So I think the case here is that it looks, while not proven yet, extremely likely that Justin Trudeau knows his opponents are attacked as anti-Asian racists, and he paved the way for that, as Aaron O'Toole said and testified, and the Prime Minister continues to use those arguments. So I think there's your answer, and I just think it's unacceptable. I think he should be brought back up in Hogue Phase 2 and answered. Was your party warned in September 2021 that disinformation of racism is being weaponized against your opponent? You didn't do anything, and you continue to not do anything, and you continue to use it yourself, because I think that's what's happening.
Oh, yeah. And so just anecdotally, just to kind of back up what you're saying here, I lived in Richmond, BC during that time. And I frequently got robocalls from God knows where. I don't understand Mandarin, but I do understand names. So it'd be a whole lot of Mandarin, then Aaron O'Toole, then Mandarin, then Conservatives, then Mandarin. And then an hour later, I would get a call in Cantonese. Same deal. Lots of Cantonese, Aaron O'Toole, lots of Cantonese, Conservatives.
Really?
Right? Yeah.
This is during the 2021 campaign?
That's right. During the 2021 campaign. Yeah.
It's incredible, because that, it's like the flip side of, there was some evidence that came out in the commission. There's a picture of Aaron O'Toole in a Toronto grocery store that's owned by what I believe is the most serious PRC proxy, according to CSIS, Fujian organized crime figure. I'm just going to leave it at that. And there's a picture of Aaron O'Toole surrounded by, AR-15s or that kind of weapon. Basically, this guy's going to flood your street with serious, weapons. So we have a Chinese asset who I'm saying is, I'm just going to leave it at that, involved in all aspects of election interference, involved in organized crime, involved in so much, involved in Chinese police stations. You got that ad in the guy's supermarket, and then you're hearing what you're hearing, and you heard Aaron O'Toole, but you if you understood Mandarin and Cantonese, you very well may have heard, racism. You may have heard, automatic weapons on the streets and all kinds of lies. But you were front and center, right in the middle of a disinfo campaign.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Well, I mean, I don't speak Cantonese or Mandarin, but I can 100% assure you that that's what that was, right? And it was interesting to be in the middle of it all, kind of knowing what was happening, right? And unfortunately, at that time, I didn't know as much as I do now. I didn't have Sam Cooper on speed dial, so I didn't have the information I needed. Although what year did Willful Blindness come out in? I think I had read it by that time.
Yeah, that would have been the early stages of your awareness.
Yeah, no, because
2021.
Well, the reason I bought your book was because I stumbled across it on Amazon, and I was in Richmond, and I grew up, we've talked about my history. I grew up right in the heart of it all, right at ground zero. So anyways, now the question I want to ask is, much has been made about 2015 and 2019. We often hear those election years referenced, right? There's very little.
2021.
Yeah. So let's talk about 2021, because that was our most recent election, right? And let's talk about the influence campaigns in 2019 versus 2021. Was it much of the same, or did it ramp up in your perspective?
Yeah, let me start by saying, referring to my story on Kenny Chu and Parm Bains, the big change in Chinese intelligence operations is an increased level of calibration. And they want the liberal minority, which has been reported and firmly supported, I believe, in open source. But in 2019, if some of these political analysts in Ottawa, really had a good recall like I do, they'll remember that in Burnaby South, near your old stomping grounds of Richmond, there's a candidate named Karen Wayne, who on WeChat comes out and says, "I'm the only Chinese candidate. Jagmeet Singh is Indian. Therefore, I, as the Chinese candidate, can beat him." This became a story in the news, and Karen Wayne had to step down. It's kind of interesting because I saw, not to get on a tangent, in my travels, I later came across a message from her calling me an irresponsible, Western journalist. So we have someone that speaks Mandarin saying that I'm an irresponsible Western journalist, as if the message is coming straight from Beijing.
Right.
Right. But so 2019, that the thing is that people that Beijing believes can be easily influenced because they only, read Mandarin news sources on WeChat, are being, told, vote for the race that right? What's more racist than that? You can just vote for who you know. But 2021, they're getting much more sophisticated, and they're saying Kenny Chu, who is Asian, has a foreign agent registry bill that's going to, essentially force you to register based on your race, pure lies. So you should vote for his, his opponent, who is Indian Canadian. And so it's like that step that they learned after getting, a little bit of a tap on the wrist in 2019. They had to pull that United Front candidate in Burnaby South. And so that's the advance, just more sophistication, more calibration, and something that didn't come out in the Hogue Commission that I think I've sort of tapped on in my story this week about liberal Parm Bains allegedly propagating the disinformation against Kenny Chu and then receiving support from the very same United Front media entities in 2021, who are the Canadian, politically connected Canadians in Toronto that could be behind starting the Chinese United Front disinformation attacks against the Conservatives. I thought that the Hogue Commission might have gotten to some of the information that I learned from my sources. I think that's a really important question. I'm going to leave it at that. But the sophistication of support for some candidates and attacks for others, that's the big difference between 2019 and 2021. And I don't have knowledge of the level of funding, but I can only, speculate that the level of funding and the sophisticated means of funding would have increased into 2021. And I'll end my answer here. What we do know is that the Hogue Commission documents say that Trudeau's, senior staff and officials were told after Kenny Chu lost. A redacted document says that the United Front Work Department looks like it's going to be emboldened by Kenny Chu's loss. And again, back to your point, why is Canada being attacked? Because for some reason, and I think we know the reason, Justin Trudeau's administration isn't doing anything to stop it.
And look, I'll add this here. This is Jason James saying it, not Sam Cooper, but if you're the leader of a first world nation that has been so obviously interfered with by a foreign regime and you're doing nothing to stop it, then there has to be a reason for that, right? Now,
I'll say that too. I mean,
okay. Just gotta be careful.
no, I mean, I think we're there. We're there. Enough people by now have seen enough evidence to say it's reasonable to to believe that the Liberal Party and Justin Trudeau are supported by Beijing. That support got more sophisticated after the Mun Wanzhou case, but Justin Trudeau and the Liberals were still supported. The Globe and Mail reported, based on a document I didn't see, that Beijing wants Canada to be divided in weak minority governments, but they want the Liberal government still at the head of it, after the Mun Wanzhou case. Before, probably, they just wanted Liberal majorities because they believed they had Justin Trudeau under their thumb. And what has the leader done with that knowledge? This is what Canadians should be asking. He knows he's being supported. He knows this activity is undermining Canada. He's had years to do something, and he hasn't. So this is why I say it's Canada's Watergate. This is allowing, and perhaps Liberal Party politicians most seriously, not only allowing, but colluding in the undermining of Canada because they get reciprocal benefits. Reciprocal relationships is a line from this NSICOP 2024 report. So yeah, I don't like to use some of the alarmist language. It wasn't me that brought out the T word or things like that if we're talking about treason or traitor. But I do think the question that the Liberal leader is witting of this activity, whether he's witting of direct funds into his coffers or not, I think he is.
Yeah.
I think I believe he probably knows that these proxies involved are involved in organized crime. So where does that take us, right? How is that not equivalent, to Richard Nixon and his friends, meddling with American democracy? It's probably worse in my mind.
Or the CIA working with the mafia to eliminate a certain president, right?
I haven't are we talking about okay, let's get on a tangent on that one. So the CIA, I know we'll lose some listeners with this, but look, fairly clearly the CIA got up to some very opportunistic bad stuff in Latin America and Cuba. And I'll leave it at this. So, and they probably, the CIA probably was a little bit friendly with some mafia people that had interests in Cuba and probably used them. And so you're saying those relationships kind of spill back over into the United States?
Yeah. So there's, this is obviously a subject that has been speculated and written on probably more than any other subject in American history. But
yeah,
from what I've read, and I've done a lot of reading, it appears that the CIA worked with the mafia, the Italian mafia, to assassinate John F. Kennedy. Now, the mafia's reasonings were, because John Kennedy, but specifically Bobby Kennedy, was going hard on the mob. And the mob were the ones that helped them get elected in the first place, right? What people don't understand is that the mob and the Teamsters had an insane amount of power in the United States during that time.
I'm with you so far. You so far. The mob got way too much power, and then they got the RICO laws. Okay.
And they also had interests in Cuba. Cuba was prior to Castro was on its way to becoming like a island Las Vegas, right? And John Kennedy, we're going to take this in a whole different direction. So I'll just say this. John Kennedy, despite his father's background, despite the criminality that existed around him for most of his life, was determined to turn the country in a direction that he felt was morally and ethically better than what it was. Mm-hmm. And he was against the CIA. He was against them operating within the United States. He knew what they were doing. He knew that they were gaining power and gaining control over American politics and American society. And he did everything in his power to try to cut them off at the knees, right? In fact, he wanted to eliminate the CIA. That was what he wanted. And I think that, and as do many others, that his assassination was the product of a partnership between the CIA and the Italian mafia in an effort to get rid of him. And they both had similar yet different motives. And the CIA and the Italian mafia, much like what you referenced in Latin America, if anybody wants to read it and they think me and Sam are crazy, go look up Pinochet. Just read the story of Pinochet and that coup and how that coup went down in Chile. During the 1960s and the 1970s, the CIA was heavily involved in a number of coups in Latin America because Latin America is very resource rich. And, if anybody's read Diary of an Economic Hitman, you can go read that as well. He goes into that quite a bit. Anyways, I think we're going off on a different path, but that's my belief. I've read a lot about it, and there's just, look, the way I always look at everything, and the reason why I love your work so much is the way I always look at everything is if there's a story, right? Something that has an impact of historical magnitude, right? And something isn't matching, something isn't lining up, then there's a problem, right?
Yeah, and it's like obviously hugely sensitive and controversial. And there's paths you've gone down on that one that I have no idea, but I 100% agree that, we should still be concerned that a US president lost their life that way. And the what I agree with you on is the indications of organized crime closeness to that are just too strong to ignore. So that's as far as I'll go with you on that one.
But that's a really great segue, because what we're seeing here through your reporting and through what we know for a fact now, that Chinese organized crime is that close to our government, has gotten that close to our government, right? And the Kennedys had very close relations to the Italian mafia. So what has happened in Canada is that we have a very similar situation, is that we have a federal leader in Justin Trudeau and his party who have, in some way, shape, or form, through fundraisers, donations, and other relationships, managed to entangle themselves with organized crime. And
I think they've turned a blind eye, and that's the thing that there's things that are still unclear, but I'm confident in saying that there's enough people at high levels in Canada that know that the funding mechanisms and the connectivity between Chinese organized crime and the Chinese consulates in Canada is the very key compromise here. And so if you're a leader and you haven't dealt with that, I've always said that's where this story has to go.
Yeah. So going back to this NSICOP report, for people listening, Sam has done some incredible reporting on this. There's also an ex account, Naya Fannerstill. She did a breakdown of it. She chopped it into pieces and kind of broke down what everything means. Sam, I want to ask you, having followed this story for a very long time now, was there anything in that report that jumped out at you? And if not, is there anything in that report for the audience, for the listeners who want to read it? Is there anything that they should look for in particular? Like what are the key elements of the report that people should pay most attention to?
Yeah, to me, there's probably 4 points that weren't news to me, but to have NSICOP come out and go further than Hogue was the step that was needed. And it was the step that was needed to, re-energize Canadians who believe this is important and want more information. So one, the line that says some Canadian politicians wittingly or through willful blindness received funds and benefits from foreign diplomats presented in ways to conceal the origin or layer them. Again, that's a quote, right? And I'm saying, as I wrote for the Bureau, this is saying Canadian politicians knowingly received transfers to their benefit consistent with money laundering.
It's bribery. It's bribery, right? Is that what?
It's a way, I believe, of accepting a benefit that assists your political either election or career. And what the NSICOP report says is, yes, this then establishes reciprocal relationships that Beijing believes will pay dividends. I'm skipping back to the Hogue report there in a document. The United Front tries to establish these bonds through support of candidates that it believes will be pro-Beijing, and they want to pay back once they're in office. So that leads to the second important point. Yes, NSICOP says there are politicians who are wittingly colluding with, states, most importantly, China and India, after receiving these benefits. And so, the other report would be, there's a big case study that sticks out in my mind like a red alarm bell about what Canadian intelligence believes is the most egregious PRC proxy. They're not named. It's 12 paragraphs. I know this because it says in the censor says 12 paragraphs are censored. And the censor explains, this is what Canadian intelligence believes is the most egregious PRC proxy involved in, quote, high harm, high risk activities targeting Canadians and permanent residents. So this gets back to what I say and believe. Proxies directly involved in high risk, high harm activity will be the organized crime people who are put forward as, thug political bosses into diaspora communities. And people are too afraid to do anything in the community for the most part, because they know they're supported by the Ministry of State Security, People's Liberation Army, the people running the police station, CCP police stations, Ministry of Public Security. So Canadians should jump to that case study and reflect back to what we're talking about. This story is about killers, money launderers, drug traffickers, human traffickers that are used by Beijing as white gloves, going back to our last podcast about an illegal casino operation, to compromise Canadian politicians, to corrupt them through benefits, and to be there, hovering over them with that corruption and compromat, and try to lever them in Parliament. So I've unpacked a big censored portion of that report, which I believe, those 3 points are what Canadians need to know.
Yeah, man. It's, the part that really bothers me is that the report is redacted and censored in any way. Like, I know that there's certain things that the public can't know for the sake of national security, but in this case, I just feel like it's of the utmost importance that we know all the details. And Sam, go ahead.
That's the debate in Ottawa right now. People are talking about this. This is a crisis. If you want to look for a crisis in Canadian democracy, we're living in it. People are saying, give us the names. And it's, as I say, a Gordian knot, because the Trudeau's government is saying, no, RCMP should investigate. But NSICOP says RCMP, here's one more thing that I forgot. The report says these instances I've talked about are likely criminal activity, but they won't result in prosecutions because Canada lacks the laws. That's it in a nutshell.
This kind of, so I was on another podcast earlier this week, and I kind of hypothesized that the RCMP and CSIS, a lot of the chatter online right now is that they're in on it. And maybe there are members of the RCMP and CSIS that are close to this thing, right?
Can I answer to that?
Yeah, please.
Yeah, no, the RCMP and CSIS at the high levels, I won't speak for everyone, but at the bureaucratic level. So these are people running these organizations that could be basically, they're bureaucrats. They're not spies and they're not cops. They can be controlled by, a Bill Blair or a Chrystia Freeland, or a Justin Trudeau, or people in Justin Trudeau's office. That's the problem. The people inside those agencies, the RCMP and CSIS, there's a tremendous amount of great great people because I know them. These are the people that sometimes are my sources. So I can help, quash that chatter you're hearing about the RCMP and CSIS being in on it. No, there's a lot of people that want to put this garbage to an end, but they're not empowered. This is a political problem. It's a political crisis. Uh, just people, please, study what I'm saying. If you don't believe me, that's fine. But I'm saying there's enough people in Canadian Parliament even that told Justin Trudeau we need the laws because of this Gordian knot. We know this activity is going on. We can't prosecute it. It's the laws, right? It's not the RCMP and CSIS.
Yeah, and I was gonna say, I on the agent level, and I guess I'll ask you this question if I'm right or I'm wrong, but I feel like on that level too, like they're reluctant to investigate because I think they know that if they open that can of worms, that it could potentially destroy our institutions, right? Like that if they follow that thread far enough, and uh, you know, they might end up inadvertently, tearing apart our political structure, right?
Like I can say at an agent level, so whether it's RCMP or CSIS, there's people that know about, bad people in Canadian business, bad people in Canadian law, of course, bad people in Canadian politics. And they also know that their bosses won't allow them to investigate. And I think more than just for legal reasons. So that does get into the area where you've got people at the bureaucratic level of the RCMP and CSIS that know that some things can't be touched. So I think there's that. Could the people at the top, worry about, if we find out this, it reveals that, again, to raise an alarming concept, elite capture, Cambodia, Mexico, state capture of, foreign crime or intelligence or domestic crime, capturing high levels of government. I think it's a pretty reasonable question to believe that, to say this is why CSIS is very reticent to come out and say that we know the primary lever of, India, China, Iran in our countries is using organized crime proxies. So it does lend something to the question you have there. I think there's probably a few explanations.
Yeah. And so I'm going to let you run here. I got two last questions for you. There was a secret memo from the RCMP to the PMO that was released online, heavily redacted, but basically the RCMP were warning the Prime Minister that a revolution is inevitable if we don't change some things here, or warning him at least that it's coming, right? That they have to do some things to prepare, because inevitably Canadians are going to figure out how bad things really are, and how deep of a hole we're in. Myself personally, I feel like culturally we're at a tipping point, right? I don't think there are many people left in this country who have any confidence in our government or the systems around it. So I want to ask you, I mean, how do you feel? Do you feel like we are at a turning point, like a hairpin turn in our country?
Like I'm aware through headlines and maybe just a bit of reading of, the memo you point to. And I don't know if it refers to like ideologically motivated extremism or a whole mainstream losing confidence in the government. But I mean, it's hard for me to say. What I do know is that, people, very knowledgeable people, are, of course, looking at the US election where these same sorts of probably things the RCMP would be referring to are being brought up. And it's hard for me to answer. Like, when is there getting to be a pretty broad lack of confidence in government? Yeah, that's undeniable. Things have gone to a place under this current administration where we've never been before in Canada, I believe.
Yeah.
So that's serious. And I know serious people, be they from, business, politics, law enforcement are seriously wondering, if Canada is the place for them in the future. So I think that says a lot, right? If people that are very tied in are now seriously thinking maybe they need to move someplace else, that's a pretty serious signboard. And if that's spread across the population, a lot of whom will not have the same mobility as some people that know even more.
Yeah.
Yeah, it does. I do think it points to a place we've never been before in Canada. Let me just leave it at that.
And that's it. That's exactly the way I perceive it. I anecdotally, I know 4 millionaire business owners who are moving their businesses to the United States, like as we speak, transferring everything over because they have no confidence anymore in this government. Listen, audience, people listening, increasing a capital gains tax does hurt business people, but it hurts the middle class the most because whenever those taxes go up, our prices go up, right? Those people aren't paying. It's not like they're going, shucks, they're passing that bill on to the consumer, right?
I'll throw one in here that a lot of reasonable people, including in civil liberties, are just getting very afraid about. And it's like the Online Harm Act. And it's like, we've talked before, we need a fair and equitable society. We need, there's no room for hate. There's no room for different ethnic groups, hatefully targeting each other. We have to handle that in Canada as other, good nations do. But the steps this government, has taken are alarming, legal professors are alarming, right. Probably anyone that takes a deep look. I mean, Margaret Atwood, she had a tweet calling, this proposed law like the prosecution of thought crimes, right? Serious people are looking at this government and the kinds of acts they're throwing out there, they make no sense.
Yeah.
They make no sense, right? I didn't think this about this government from 2015 to probably for a few years, but year by year, it's just like, it's not adding up.
Well, it does add up if you put on your tinfoil hat. But we don't do that here. Not with Sam.
We already talked about the Kennedy one. Let's not do another one.
Yeah, let's not go down that hole. But I will say, the problem I think too has to do with what has happened to us culturally, right? When Sam Cooper gets accused of the same level of racism as actual far right extremist whack job dudes on the internet, that's the problem, right? It's a philosophical issue. How do we define hate? And is Sam Cooper reporting on very real problems, right? Which, look, we haven't even gotten into this, but this problem of the way that the Chinese Communist Party has influence or holds sway over the Chinese diaspora, there's an immigration conversation in there, right? There's a conversation that we have to have on, okay, yeah, please, Sam, I know you're itching to add. Go ahead, man.
No, I was going to listen to you, but I read in the New York Times this morning that, a newsletter saying this is a real conversation in countries, liberal democracies, right? That, it was suppressed for a long time, but we've seen in the United States, where a lot of your listeners are, and we're seeing in Canada, people are looking for reason, balance, and common sense. And that conversation was suppressed for a long time with, just push button accusations of xenophobia and racism. So I think that's where you were going.
Right. Yeah, no, but that's it, right? Like, it benefits the people who are benefiting from this to label Sam Cooper an anti-Asian racist or a conservative shill or whatever else they want to call you, right? It benefits them because they're benefiting from the bad stuff, right? But culturally and just from a national perspective, we have to be careful how we define these terms, right? Because, well, what is hate speech then, right? Is hate speech Sam reporting on something real because it involves people from China? Right? Is that as bad as a guy who spends 4.5 hours sounding off on racist tirades on the internet?
These are sensitive conversations and we need to be having them,
Right.
I I learned that the people that I was exposing for being Beijing sponsored thugs and diasporas, right? The people that are running police stations, the people that are supporting illegally our politicians in a clandestine way, are the same people that tried to sue me, are the same people that attacked Kenny Chu, are the same people that unfortunately Justin Trudeau keeps amplifying, are the same people that want to see an online hate act, right? So that's where you had to ask the bills coming forward, it could be a good idea even, but it could be tweaked in ways by people that are being influenced by foreign states, right? And that's what, people you mentioned right at the start. This is why it matters, because legislation matters. It affects the way you're going to live, and it could take years before you realize how it affects you.
And so, yeah, and that's where I'm getting to is, my perspective on speech. I think all speech should be free. I think I'm a free speech absolutist. I feel like you should be able to say anything, not without consequence, but it's the only way we figure out who the assholes are. Sorry, Miss Cooper. It's the only way we figure out who they are, right? And that what has happened is that we've had a sliding scale on what counts as hate. And now, the online harms bill is designed to get rid of, the most egregious actors. But in that, because it's so wide sweeping, Sam Cooper gets swept up in it too. And so do I. And we disappear. And I think that's the true ambition, right?
Yeah, I don't know the full intention. I don't know exactly who's influenced, but I do know that there's professors and Margaret Atwood saying this is trying to prosecute thought crimes.
Yeah.
Right. And I didn't even want to engage with like this bill or the reporting on it. It's just so out there. But I mean, these are, we're going to differ in some areas, you and me, on whatever we think's going on. But we're going to agree that bills can change your life and make you want to leave the country.
Yeah.
For reasonable people.
Yeah. And the important thing is that we're able to have those discussions, right? The important thing is that Sam and I can talk about who really killed JFK, and Sam can think I'm crazy and I can think Sam is a normie, right?
I can say that. I'm gonna say there could be some organized crime, and I'm just gonna drop a wall and say no CIA, but I'm gonna listen to you.
But the important thing is that we can have these conversations, and people who are listening can decide, how crazy I am and how on the nose Sam is, right? And that, but we're losing that ability, and we're losing that ability not because anybody's worried about people's feelings getting hurt or people inflaming racial hatred, galvanizing groups against other groups. What they're worried about is exactly what you're doing. They're worried about you. And someday when the lawyers are gone and the lawsuits are settled and you're free and clear and you're back to ripping around on your bike, we'll talk about what you went through, because I don't think people truly understand what Sam Cooper's world is like, right? And man, I kiss your ass every time we talk. Sorry, Mrs. Cooper, but I really think you might be the most important figure of this generation for our country.
Oh man!
Like, well, I really think that, dude. Every time
you make a T-shirt that says that, so I can show it.
But every time I put out an episode now, just to kind of bookend this with what we started with, the messages now are coming from all over the world, and people being like, what is going on in Canada? Like, your message is getting to people, and people are seeing what you're reporting, and they're understanding that you're telling the truth, And I think, now with this NSICOP report, it's basically just confirmed what you've been telling everybody for years. And, I
can confirm that that people in the CIA community, people in Taiwan, my book just got translated and marketed in Taiwan, Germany, Sweden. I'm hearing from everyone like you are. So
yeah,
I may not. I don't know if I'll ever show my wife the T-shirt that says that you're the guy for this generation, but I'm gonna confirm what you're saying, that people around the world are noticing, this reporting.
Well, I mean, and to the CIA, I apologize for implicating you in the assassination of JFK. But one final question, Sam, and then I'll let you go because I know you got to run. Jagmeet Singh came out the other day and held his little press conference and said that if he ever found out that there were people in his caucus who were under foreign influence, that they would be tossed out immediately. What's your reaction to that coming from him?
I mean, he should care, as I've just said, that, he was targeted by China in 2019, and a candidate said, vote for her because she's Chinese. Don't vote for him because he's Indian. So he should definitely care. Uh, I've reported that from 2019, Beijing got more sophisticated in its support for Justin Trudeau and calibrated its support to people across party lines. This is not, this. I don't think this is news to Jagmeet Singh. He has people that are supported, whether they're witting, semi-witting, or useful idiots. He's got to know he has people in his party, and probably not just China involved. We're talking about India, we're talking about Pakistan, other countries, Iran, just so, 4 or 5 deeply, deeply into all parties in Canada. So that's my reaction. He's a good politician. He's a good leader, but it's time for him to lead. If he believes what he's talking about, I would say that it's time for him to have Canadians go to the polls, and he can be the one that decides that.
That's my response exactly. If you really mean what you're saying, then let's get that no confidence vote, and let's get an election, right?
Let the Canadian that I'm glad you said that. That's the solution to the bind we're in. As quick as possible, we need an election, because we're not going to get a prosecution from the RCMP. We're not going to get these magical names. As I say, we could be talking about 50. I think you framed it well. We could have 5, we could add 50 if we're including Senate. Who knows? 60 more
Right.
people that either wittingly or unwittingly have received support from hostile states who expect them to do something for it. So we're at a good place for Canadians to vote on that.
And he is in probably the best position possible, right? He can use the leverage that he has as part of Justin Trudeau's coalition government, as the one who's really protecting them. He can pressure the Liberals to smoke out the people in their party, whether it's sitting or not, who are currently under foreign influence, right? The Conservatives, I'm sure, I mean, I can't say I'm sure, but I would imagine if they could smell blood in the water, that they would smoke out the people in their party as well, just to match it, right? Just to show that they did it too. And he is the guy that can say, look, either you guys purge these elements from your parties, or we're going to the election booths, right? And that's the part with me is, it's like, for me, I personally don't like him because he's just all talk, and a lot of what he says doesn't make any sense to me, right? But it's always like very, very flimsy criticisms of Justin Trudeau, and then he turns around and votes with the Liberals because that's him holding up his end of the bargain. And I really don't know what he's getting out of that deal, right? But
maybe a pension. I don't know.
Yeah. So there it is. Sam Cooper, the most important man of this generation. I'm going to get those Sam Cooper was right shirts made eventually. Sam, we'll work out the percentage split on that, because I think people need to start wearing those.
That's a good brand, man. That's a good brand. I like that.
So in the meantime, can you tell everybody where they can find you?
Yeah, run over to the bureau.news, where I reported this week about the next step of the Kenny Chu story, and that is that the documents indicate that his candidate unfortunately amplified disinformation against Mr. Chu and received benefits back. I'm talking from the highest levels of the United Front in Canada can visually be seen campaigning with Mr. Baines, right? You know, a photo is a photo, is how I ended our last talk. You can read 3,000 words, but you can also see photos at thebureau.news. And you can go to Twitter at Scooper Cooper, where, you know, like I say, if I'm feeling like a little peppy, I'll put some hip hop tunes into my commentary as well.
You don't want Sam to get peppy. Sam, my brother, hang around for 10 seconds. We'll say goodbye privately as always. But, you know, I always close this with, you know, blowing more smoke. But, you know, for the audience, like, you know, I'm not the brightest guy. And this NSICOP report was difficult for me to read. And I rely on Sam. He's fantastic at taking these really big, high concepts and distilling them down into ways. He's like Mama for Forrest Gump, but we're all Forrest Gump, right? And he explains it in a way that we can understand. And he perfectly highlights what the threats and the dangers are in all this. So I highly recommend you sign up at the Bureau. And if you have an extra couple bucks a month, sign up as a paid subscriber. Look, you know, I say this for myself as a writer, but, you know, if we're putting me and Sam in the same world together, I've said this before and I'll say it again. I'm a stray dog. Sam is a prize German Shepherd, right? Sam's reporting is so important. It's so important. People do not, you do not understand. Sam is the reason, one of the major reasons why all of this is happening in our country now. Sam is being referenced by, you know, the Pentagon in the United States. Like, Sam's reporting is top shelf. So please, if you're going to support anybody, if you're going to subscribe to anybody, please subscribe to the Bureau. This is not a paid advertisement. Sam isn't giving me anything for this. I'm going to have to split the profits of the Sam Cooper Was Right t-shirts regardless. But I want to stress to you all this because, you know, I'm writing an essay right now about actual misinformation and the things that I'm seeing online and the things that are emotion driven and all the sensationalism that we constantly see, right? Everything is one or two sentences and it's all the end of the world. And Sam is one of the guys who's actually bringing you the real facts. So please subscribe to the Bureau. Sam, my brother, that was probably the longest advertisement I've ever done for anybody, but it's, as always, an honor to host you, man. I'm so glad we get to do this. And let's check in again in a couple of weeks because I'm sure another pile of, sorry, Miss Cooper, another pile of shit is going to get thrown through the fan. So we'll follow up on that in a few weeks.
Right. Thanks, man.
Thank you.